The great Mike Krzyzewski once said, great rivalries don't have to be built on hatred. They're built on a respect for excellence. When you ask longtime Galaxy fans about the greatest rivals in the club's history, some may say LAFC, San Jose Earthquakes, maybe even Seattle Sounders. But there is only one club that always merits respect from Galaxy fans, and that is DC United. Once considered the best of the best in MLS, both clubs find themselves in deep waters. They will face off again this Saturday as they are both fighting to salvage their seasons. Will LA Galaxy make it 3 wins in a row at home, or will DC United come out on top as the air rings with their victory cry?
It's in the net. Oh, it's in the net. It's in the net. Goal, DC United.
You're tuned into news across the galaxy where they talk all things LA Galaxy with the Nag Boys. Let's start nagging.
Good evening or afternoon to you if you're on the West Coast. Good evening to you wherever you may be. And welcome to News Across the Galaxy's The Midweek Show. Coming at you live from the banged up NAG Studio submarine, which I think is slowly returning to the surface after having sunk to the darkest of bottomless voids at the depths of the MLS table. I'm your host, Edgar Zuniga, with a true NAG original on the ones and twos, Bryant Lobos. On tonight's show, we are going to go over the latest Galaxy and MLS news and preview this weekend's LA Galaxy match against old rivals DC United. And to help us do all that, coming at us live from the district, we are joined by a true broadcasting legend. Just listen to this. He spent 30 years with WTOP Radio in Washington, D.C., where he was sports director and morning sports anchor. He has also been the voice of the NBA's Washington Wizards for 28 years and spent 2 seasons providing sideline coverage for the NHL's Washington Capitals and received an Emmy Award as host of the Capitals Face-Off television show and was also bestowed with a Lifetime Achievement Emmy in 2023, was named the DC Sportscaster of the Year by the National Sports Media Association in 2020, was also elected to the DC Sports Hall of Fame. But to MLS fans, we know him as the voice of MLS Originals DC United since 1996. Please give a warm welcome to the one and only Dave Johnson.
That was quite an intro there. But for all my accomplishments, I can still only get on your show every 2 years. I'm trying to make it an annual thing. That's what I really want.
Yeah, and that's what we missed. We missed that rivalry. By the way, I was going through the list of accomplishments. I'm like, you sound like one of those like heavyweight champions that has won like all has like a alphabet soup of like titles left and right. Well, welcome back to the show, Dave. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been 2 years, 2 long years. I know me as an original MLS fan, I used to savor these moments to play against teams from the East, especially an old rival, like I said, DC United. Um, thank you so much for joining us. I mean, I know there's other options. I know people suggested like, yeah, there's podcasts from that cover DC, but I was like, no, we got to hear from the man himself, Dave Johnson, because you've been a guest on the show before, and we love to hear what you have to say.
Well, it's a great. I'm sorry that my decor is early prison cell. I'm here in my apartment in Washington D.C., but it's important, and what people need to know, and especially our younger fans, both LA Galaxy and DC United, this is a rivalry that is still very much in. If you're a DC United supporter or an LA Galaxy supporter, in our DNA, because to what you said, DC United and LA Galaxy from the start in '96, and how everything's so organized now. We have 30 teams, but as you remember, it was a race really to get that '96 season started, and there was a lot of kind of making it up as you went along, and so the clubs like LA, like DC, that were able to establish a level of excellence out of the gate needs to be celebrated, and certainly the first few years, their commitment to excellence and entertainment on the field really helped this league to where it is now. And again, if there was not a DC United, if there was not an LA Galaxy, early teams with, if I use a phrase, sex appeal, Maybe we're not having this conversation. Again, we have so much to celebrate in 2025, but there were periods of time in 2011 during that period, or pardon me, 2001, where we're thinking, is this league still going to be around? Well, it's around because of people like you and people that are watching this right now that have the true passion for our game. I know now. I mean, look, once upon a time, you couldn't see any soccer on television or radio. Now you can't turn on something or get your phone out, and there's always a game going on. But it's important that we have our game if we're going to continue to grow as a soccer country, which we are.
Sorry about that. I was muted. No, I was saying that there's so much soccer going on right now that it's really hard to keep up to. You have the Club World Cup. We
Yeah.
just wrapped up the Gold Cup. I know the women's AFCON is going on. The women's Euros are going on. And then you have all the exhibition matches. And it's like, wow. And then we have the World Cup coming up next year. There's just so much to do and to see. And if you're like a huge aficionado of the sport, you're feasting right now. Um, but before we get into other stuff like that, let's get into some MLS news that we need to share. Very sobering news coming out of Atlanta United as Garth Lagerwey, the club's president and CEO, has been diagnosed with cancer and will take an indefinite leave of absence. He is somebody that LA Galaxy I know pursued for a while, and Atlanta United fans have had a very interesting relationship with him. When I've been listening to the Scarps and Spikes podcast, some of them feel they need to pressure him because he needs to do more for the club, and then some have questioned some of the decisions that he's made, especially with bringing in Latte Love and Miguel Almiron to this team, who at first it seemed like Atlanta was primed for a big season, and right now they're near the bottom. We had them on the Wooden Spoon Collective, so we know they've had a rough season. But Garth, in the end, Dave, you mentioned that you know him personally. He seems like a very genial person. Can you give us a little bit of background on him?
Well, I have no doubt that he'll get it right in Atlanta, or at least he'll do everything in his power to try it. And again, and look, you're going through it right now. Well, you, DC United, it's not easy in this league. And I'm not saying it was easy when it was a 10-team league, but now you're competing against 28 other teams or 29 other teams. Obviously his success in Seattle and Real Salt Lake was real. So you don't do it in two different places and have the kind of success they've had. But what I can speak to Garth Lagerwey, I called broadcast his games when he was in college, when he was a goalkeeper at Duke University. And then he got a law degree. And he was actually my broadcast partner for a while on DC United broadcast. And he was very good at that. But he always wanted to get in to the management of a Major League Soccer team. And again, he has a law degree, the soccer acumen and expertise, and also just the work ethic. I remember talking to him when he started. Finally, he got that Real Salt Lake job, which was his break into executive management. And I remember just talking to him about the hours he would put in, because people have to understand, especially at the time, when he took that job, and it still is today. This is not a league, and there's only a couple leagues, the Premier League, or select teams that can shop in the Rodeo Drive section of football players, if you will, and the speculation is on who they're going to get a transfer for of a big name. You have got to do the scouting and the work to find, and it's a big soccer world out there, and you've got to find. Christian Gomez, for example, who was MVP of the league, and the last time DC United won an MLS Cup, you've got to find a Christian Gomez in Argentina, and so the same with the Real Salt Lake when he was there, and it still exists with all teams in Major League Soccer. Not everybody is going to sign a Messi, and this is why if I'm Atlanta, I think Garth has been put in a position, but it's not a league where I think you turn things around 180 in just a couple of months.
Yeah, and another team that has been struggling to turn things around for themselves is Austin FC. We're changing subjects here, but Austin FC's Brandon Vasquez, he suffered a non-contact injury in his club's U.S. Open Cup win over San Jose Earthquakes last night. It was a match that I was watching myself. It was very exciting, and then you see Vasquez go down, and anytime it's a non-contact injury, immediately catches your attention. It turns out it's a torn ACL, and now he's going to undergo season-ending surgery. This not only affects Austin FC, but he's somebody who's definitely not radar for the U.S. men's national team as the World Cup is coming up, and it makes you wonder if not only what if he's going to be prepared for his club, but also his country, because these type of knee injuries. And let me tell you, I've had two knee surgeries, and they were minor compared to what he had, and the recovery takes the longest time. So, wishing Vasquez the best. But they on a more lighter side of news, with the Club World Cup final taking place at MetLife Stadium in New York metropolitan area, New York City FC, who have long been referred to as the Pigeons by MLS fans, fully embraced this nickname with an amazing marketing scheme. Yeah, they've had little pigeons on their kits in the past, but yesterday they actually sailed a massive inflatable pigeon that traveled down the Hudson River past all five boroughs before nesting at their future home at Willets Point.
Yeah.
I mean, this is gonna go down MLS lore, right?
Yeah, look, that's just brilliant, and this is where what we're talking about here is it's supposed to be fun, and that's pure fun, and you can have nicknames beyond your original name. And I think about when, and I'm going old school, but you'll appreciate this, when the Metro Stars, which were the precursor now to the Red Bulls, not New York City FC, when they were introduced, and one of their alternate logos was a taxi cab, if you remember, and everybody just thought, wow, that's brilliant, because when you think of New York City, well, you think of pigeons, but you also think of taxi cabs. So embrace where you're from.
Yeah, you mentioning the taxi cab reminds me of how there's that story that the club was originally be called the Empire Soccer Club, because the Empire State, right?
Yeah.
And the Empire Supporters Club took that name, and their mascot is like an angry skunk who's a taxi driver, and I was like, that's awesome. So these little things are what makes this league so much fun, and these are things that will grow over time. I feel just like you see stuff that's lore now in the
Yeah.
Premier League or in the Liga.
Yeah.
Speaking of Premier League and La Liga and other leagues, the Club World Cup is wrapping up this weekend. And I was curious, Dave, from your point of view, what are some takeaways and lessons learned that can be applied to the upcoming World Cup?
Well, with all due respect, and I met him once, and a perfectly nice guy. I don't think you should bring Michael Buffer back to say, "Let's get ready to rumble," because that didn't resonate with me. Because he's more of a again, he's got a great thing going, and this is nothing personal. I just think this is a semifinal match, and I'm more a traditionalist. So that's one thing I think we learned from that. I also think we learned that we are a soccer country. The attendance for the Club World Cup was just fine. In fact, it was great. And that goes against some of the headlines. Right away you saw, especially after the first round, they were counting the number of empty seats. Never mind, the average was more than half the capacity of these places. They were counting the empty seats. Well, they were empty because you were playing in huge stadiums, but also you had situations like a South Korean team and a team from South Africa playing in Orlando. And with all due respect to those teams, you're just not going to get a big crowd for that. There was a game between LAFC and I'm forgetting who, but it was a European team on a Monday afternoon in Atlanta when people have to work. You're not going to, but just the other day, the last 2 days, as this tournament has picked up, we've had crowds of 70 and 60. And somebody pointed out after the first round of the Club World Cup, the average attendance, given, and that included dealing with some extreme lows in a couple of places, was 35,000. Well, that's a bigger attendance than any league but the Premier League and the Bundesliga. And it's also a first time event. Now, in some ways it's not. They've always, as you know, they've always done this. For years it was in Japan in December. It was a Toyota Cup for years. So I applaud the initiative to say, let's make this more of an event. Did it mean something to fans? Well, ask the Brazilian fans and the Argentinian fans that took over Miami, and well, even of the European clubs and everyone. Yes, the Japanese fans and Urawa Red Diamonds did so well. So I think I applaud FIFA for look. We're going to try this, and the first one is not going to necessarily be perfect. I'm not saying it was perfect, but look, it looks like PSG is going to win the title. I would think, based on the way they're playing, and I think they showed that in the Champions League. But having said that, we had some amazing matches, amazing moments, and amazing atmosphere, and so I think it just actually further amplifies that we are a soccer country, the United States. Look, in the World Cup 1994, we sold out every game, but there was no doubt we were the first country to make the Olympics profitable in 1984. The United States has always known how to host a big event. Now, you think about the 1984 Olympics. Yeah, we sold out every event, but that doesn't mean we're a synchronized swimming country. That doesn't mean everything
Yeah.
translates. But what it shows to me, with the Gold Cup going on at the same time, and yeah, you can focus on, well, it wasn't sold out here. The passion is there. A lot of people are attending all these matches. And it's not that long ago. I remember Bruce Murray is my broadcast partner on DC United games, a U.S. Soccer Hall of Famer, one time the all-time leading goal scorer for the U.S. national team. And, we remember in 1992 in Washington, D.C., we had one game. The U.S. played Ireland, and there was like 20,000 people on a rainy night, and we were all doing backflips. So that's how far we've come. I know they bring up the heat's going to be an issue. You know what? It was an issue in '94 because they're playing these games for the European television audience. It'd be better if you played the games at night. I still remember I think it was the Irish team, playing in Orlando and in the summer heat in '94, and those poor players had never experienced heat like that before. It was like having jets on the tarmac right next to them. But it just further whets our appetite. Look, we're hosting a World Cup. There's no event in the world like the World Cup, and I never thought I'd see one in my lifetime in my country. Now we're going to see two.
Oh, sorry. So the only thing that sticks to my mind is the pricing, because I remember I saw that in some stadiums the pricing was just exorbitant. It was like $470 to see a match, and then that was a pre-sale, and then the day of they're selling tickets for like $13. I'm like, wow. Somebody mentioned that it'll cost more to buy like a beer at the stadium than it is to just get into the stadium. So I
Right.
thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
Hopefully, the FIFA sees this and they come out with a pricing scheme that will make it easy for, like, your normal fans to be able to attend the World Cup. I know you mentioned '94. Um, I was only 18, and I was really hoping to watch some matches. Unfortunately, we had a family emergency, and I wasn't able to catch anything. So I always wanted to watch some games of the World Cup. My son just turned 5, and I always had 2026 penned an opportunity to take him to see something amazing like that. And I just hope that I can afford it because,
Yeah.
um, it's I don't want to get priced out.
No,
Um,
that's a great point. And unfortunately, it's important that the game doesn't get, and this is not just soccer, it's every game. And they call it dynamic pricing. It's funny how they always come up with a nice word or a word that means you're going to pay more. We call it dynamic pricing. And, they do it in basketball and hockey and every other sport where, okay, well, wait a minute, this is a big matchup. LeBron's coming to town. The tickets are going to be whatever. And then for another team, it's a different story. I think I agree with you. The consistent pricing is important, and also to make sure you're not pricing out, the real supporters. And look, this happens with every event because there's certain companies or whatever that are spending all kinds of money and they feel a need to take care of those people. So, I get that side of it as well. But it's important that it doesn't get too expensive. And look, that's become an issue in the Premier League in England and the other countries where football has always been the working man's and woman's sport. And now you find some Premier League fans that say, well, I can't go to the club that my dad supported because I can't afford it. So that's a real issue. And you would think I would hope rather that for the World Cup that they consider that just go ahead and price it, and somebody might get lucky, and for whatever a cheap ticket is today, and they end up seeing an amazing match, and then maybe somebody sees a match between two countries that they weren't so excited to see, but that's part of a tournament.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I would love to watch the U.S., but I'll be happy if I get like, I don't know, Nicaragua versus Senegal or something like
Yeah.
that.
Well,
Hope
and
that's
the beauty is there's going to be fans from everywhere. I remember in France at '98, attending Bulgaria and Nigeria. That's hardly um, both great footballing nations, but that's not a top ticket event. But when you got in the stadium, it was at Parc des Princes, the home of PSG. Uh, you just get caught up in the passion of the fan, because there's going to be fans representing all those countries next year at the World Cup, and that's part of it, because it means more than any other sporting event to these countries, to all these countries, and I hope it does to the United States.
definitely. Thank you. Um, so on a more local note, I was going to mention that Ricky Pooch has officially rejoined his teammates in training. He continues to recover from the knee injury that left him out of MLS Cup 24. And for the majority of the season, this is a huge news for LA Galaxy fans. But I keep reminding people this club has been so bad all season. Don't expect Ricky Pooch to come in here and start partying the Red Sea. Although it seems that he's still on track for a return to action later this month or in early August, just in time for Leagues Cup. I know some people are saying just shelve him, save him for next season. God forbid something happens to him and Leagues Cup and he gets re-injured or hurts something else. But to be honest, I think it's time that we get him out and get him running, get him in some contact, so that way he'll be ready to go for 2026. Dave, the last time we spoke to you was in 2023 during a time when LA Galaxy was going through a lot of uncertainty, both on and off the pitch. That Galaxy team finished second to last in the Western Conference, but they seem to be on an upswing. And boy, what a turnaround 2024 was. I know you're mostly focused on the Eastern Conference, but at what point did the 24 LA Galaxy squad catch your attention? And when did you think they had a legitimate chance at winning MLS Cup?
Well, that's a good question. Again, Greg Vanny is someone, as I mentioned, that my belief in Garth Lagerway is so strong. There's certain people that I have such strong beliefs that they're going to, whatever situation they're put in, they're going to figure out the right way to use certain players. Bruce Arena certainly is another one. And look, I'm not breaking news here. His resume, Greg Vanny's resume, when you can have success at more than one place, like the people I just mentioned have had, that's not an accident. That's not an accident. You didn't just get lucky. And look, part of life is getting lucky. And when I say lucky, I think your Galaxy 25 season is different if Ricky Puig is healthy. And your Galaxy 25 season, it doesn't necessarily surprise me. Maybe not to the point of the low point you're at right now, but I think about as DC United won MLS Cup '99, and we've been in all four MLS championships, and we're still just rolling along. And then we had to trade a couple of key players. We still had Marco Echeverri, we still had Jaime Moreno, but then all of a sudden, 2000 was just a terrible year. And I think the same with the Galaxy. You had to Jovelevich is no longer Brugman was your MVP. You could suddenly you don't think it's major changes, but it's changes, and you have to make adjustments. So when when the Galaxy hired Greg Vanny, and with that talent, I don't know exactly when in 24 I thought they'll have a chance, but it felt normal to me to see the Galaxy having that success.
Well, um, what do you make of their collapse this season? Because it's like we mentioned before we came on, because you mentioned that, yeah, some players came in, some players come out. I know Bruce once said that the league abhors legacies, right? They don't want teams to be too dominant for too long.
Right.
They don't want like a Bayern Munich situation, for example. But is there anything that could have predicted what happened this season? Because this
No,
is incredible.
yeah. I mean, what was the winless streak to start? 13 or something like
It was
that.
like 14 matches.
Yeah. So, but look, DC and I just played Nashville in the, and I don't mean this in any disrespect to Nashville, but Nashville's on like a 14 or 15 game unbeaten streak, and I don't know. I wouldn't have said, yeah, that team is going to, not lose. So I think that's what makes Major League Soccer. Um, it should be a great league for fans because you have a chance every year. That's the whole thing that has made the NFL such a success. Is it the old phrase on any given Sunday. It's not a league like the Premier League where you get it seems like it's the same 8 teams year to year, for example, and you could say the same in some other leagues as well. So I think it's a plus for fans. It's not if it's your team that is down at the bottom, and it's not if you're a coach at one of those teams. But I no, I didn't say, well, they're going to win MLS Cup and then they're going to lose 15 in a row to start the next season. I didn't see that coming. So obviously, if I had an explanation for that, I'd be making a lot more money. I'd be on the Galaxy payroll.
No, it's been fascinating because you talk to any MLS podcaster, I mean any Galaxy podcaster, and we've all chatted amongst each other, and it's like, how do you describe what's been happening with the team? After a while, you start running out of adjectives and adverbs, and then you switch to nouns and verbs, and you run out of those too, and you're left there scratching your head like, what's going on? It's unbelievable because they found ways to lose that people can't even imagine. Like, how do you lose a match without allowing, letting their club even get a shot off? Not even a shot on goal, just not a shot off, and that's what happened against Kansas City. That's incredible.
But
Um,
I've been there. I can think of a DC United game where we lost, where we didn't allow the other team a shot. So it happens. I get it, and I feel the pain.
Yeah, switching to DC United, what has happened to DC since 2023? Because for a while, this club seemed to be on the verge of something better, never quite materialized. And then we heard this morning about the dismissal of Troy Lesesne, right? On the heels of that crushing 5-2 loss in the Open Cup to Nashville. I remember I was watching that match and I was like, oh, wow, look, DC's flying. And all of a sudden, it was just
Yeah.
like, dear God, this is a hall of horrors. Um, did his dismissal come as a surprise?
Maybe last night it came as a surprise. Troy Lesesne, I have the utmost respect for. He came in 24. And DC United, oddly enough, if they had a better home record last season, they'd be in the playoffs. Now, they had the same point total as the final team that made the playoffs in the Eastern Conference, but they lost on goal difference. So they were. So you're thinking, okay, you're right there last year, and now the goal was to to clean up the goal differential, and that obviously has failed miserably. So and again, it also shows how quickly, it's important not to celebrate too early, and also important not to, panic or go nuts too early because, DC United started the season 4 games unbeaten. It looked like they were heading in the right direction, and all of a sudden there was a loss in Orlando that it was a 4-1 loss and wasn't a good outing, and they bounced back, I think, a week later, and they thought, all right, that's better. And there was a 6-1 loss on the road to San Jose. And then you start to have some doubts, but again, it's early. But the way things have been going the last 2 months, again, a 7-1 loss to Chicago recently, really have struggled to score. And again, Christian Benteke missed about 6 weeks with injury, but this team cannot be just about Christian Benteke scoring. I think we had become too predictable, quite frankly, to play against. And at the end of the day, Troy Lesesne losing his job is just a victim of You can do all the right things, and believe me, he tried to do all the right things, embracing the culture of the team, the fans of the team. I remember when he reached out to me for Raul Diaz Arce's phone number earlier this season. I thought, boy, here's someone who just gets it, that this club is been around for 30 years and has legends that mean something to the fan base. So he tried, and he invited those legends in to help inspire the current team. Unfortunately, it just didn't translate and hasn't translated on the field.
Yeah, it's hard. Now, my next question to you is: I know that a new manager. I mean, it's going to be an interim manager. I'm sure the club's going to start looking for somebody to replace him. But are there any potential transfers that DC United is already targeting for the summer, or do you think the club's just going to remain like as it is?
No, I have a feeling they might. I don't know who. And again, that gets back to what I was talking about earlier. Is we get players like David Schnegg, who's a good player, who's a leading assist player. In other words, but I didn't know about David Schnegg before we acquired him, and I'm thrilled we have him. Um, and that's where you have to make the moves that hopefully will make a difference. So I think there will be some changes or signings. Coming up with the summer transfer windows coming up. I think, also maybe that coincides with the timing of the decision to part ways with Troy. Let's say they wanted Troy to succeed. There's no question in my mind, and he, as I said, it did all the right things in terms of trying to create the right infrastructure around the club to succeed. It just has not been happening on the field.
Well, let's transition into this old rivalry between these two teams. Currently, the table positions: Galaxy remain mired in last place in the West and last overall in MLS, but they've been creeping up on CF Montreal and can crawl out of last place this weekend. Can you imagine that? Meanwhile, DC United are sitting in 13th place in the East and 25th in MLS overall, 10 points adrift from the last playoff spot in the East. These are all rivals, like I said, all time record. Um, 52 matches across all competitions. Galaxy has 23 wins. DC United has 18 with 11 draws between both. At home, playing at home, LA Galaxy and DC United have played each other 26 times, with LA Galaxy winning 13 of those, with DC United winning 7 with 6 draws. The last time out was on May 20th, 2023. DC United absolutely smashed the LA Galaxy 3-0. After a scoreless first half, LA Galaxy defense buckled. You remember Jonathan Bond gave up a horrible goal, and then the team went on to give up 3 goals in a span of 9 minutes. But interestingly enough, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but the last time DC United won at the Dig was in July 22, 2005. What were you doing 20 years ago? When
Well,
a fella named Freddie Adu scored the game winning goal at the death, and LA Galaxy were shut up by some guy named Nick Rimando?
yeah. Those were good times. Those were good times. Wow, Hall of Famer and deservedly so, uh,
Yeah.
Nick Romando. And yeah, that was when we thought Freddie Dew was going to be the next our Messi, or it didn't quite work out that way. But the rivalry remains. I tell you what makes to me this game obviously. Plenty of motivation for LA playing at home. Their standing does not represent who they are as a club, as a fan base, and you're playing a DC United team that just fired their coach. I think in any sport, that's the most dangerous time to play a team. You might say, "Well, DC United, they just blew a 2-0 lead to Nashville, lost 5-2 Open Cup. They can't score a goal in MLS. This is a guaranteed win." As Bruce Murray and I were talking about it today, look, Kevin Flanagan is going to be the interim coach. He's the academy director. Uh, it's not like in 48 hours until game time or wherever we are right now that he's going to be able to change something dramatically on the tactics board. So I think you're going to have a DC United team just going out there and playing. And frankly, that can work one of two ways. They're so unpredictable to play against, they come up with a win, or they're so unpredictable to play against, LA ends up winning 5-0. So I think it's very hard to predict what's going to happen on Saturday.
Yeah. Now, as far as player availability is concerned, like we said, Ricky Puig is still nursing that knee injury. He is back in training, so to be determined. I mean, we're not going to see him suit up for this match, but just keep an eye on him. As far as disciplinary, Carlos Emiro Garces and Isaiah Parente are still one yellow card away from a suspension or fine. Dave, what can you tell us from the DC side of things?
Aaron Herrera, who, by the way, shout out to Guatemala for what they did at the Gold Cup, and Aaron Herrera and Kai Rolls, I believe, are one caution away from suspension. And in terms of this, is actually a relatively healthy DC United team. Lucas McNaughton, a defender, remains sidelined with injury, but they've been able to get Christian Benteke back, João Peglo back, Gabriel Pirani has come back, so they've gotten players back from injury. So it's a healthy team that again, as I said, will come in. I think maybe with a chip on their shoulder to say, we want to show. We know there's a new manager coming in. There's typically when there's a coaching change, you at least get that one game spark. Now you hope it lasts, but DC United, I think, will be. I'm repeating myself, a dangerous team to play on Saturday.
So, Dave, which DC United players will need to make an impact to beat LA Galaxy? I know we know about Benteke, but what other players do you think will need to make an impact to beat this LA Galaxy team?
Well, Bruce Murray and I discussed in our podcast we do called First 11, and it's something we discussed in the game. And I don't know if it's going to happen, but there's a player called Jackson Hopkins. He's a young American player who has come back with an attitude. And every time he gets in the game, he makes a difference. So we think DC United should start him. Now, whether that happens or not, I don't know. But he's a player that's not afraid to go at people, just do whatever it takes. And that's the kind of attitude they're going to need right now. I'll give you an example. Last night, or Wednesday night against Nashville, he comes off the bench late, and within a couple of minutes, he's taken an ambitious shot from 30 yards. It just misses, wide. But he's got the chutzpah, or whatever the term you want to use, that says, all right, because this team cannot be passive anymore. It cannot be passive. The quest for the Cup, U.S. Open Cup, that dream is now over. 10 points out of a playoff spot, though, maybe you can still save the season, but you can't save it being passive. And so I don't know if he's going to start. I hope he comes off the bench because I believe, and Bruce Murray believes, he's a difference maker.
Okay, Dave. I don't know how familiar you are with this LA Galaxy team, but they've had to make a lot of changes, especially up top. They brought in Christian Ramirez, who a lot of people were saying, he's not exactly Dejan Jovlich, but the guy, he scored goals wherever he's gone. Maybe they can insert him into this lineup, and the team will find a way to incorporate him into the attack. They had a really difficult time with him. He scored some goals early on, but overall, it was just very difficult for him to get acclimated with the team, and a lot of it had to do with speed. When you had guys like Gabriel Peck and Joseph Pinto on the wings, they run up the wings, and then they look back, and here comes, good old Christian Ramirez. So they have new guys in there. Mateus Nascimento has come in from Brazil. He's made a big impact with the club, especially in recent times. And I think that he's been one of the reasons that the team has turned things around, sort of, kind of. So my question for you, Dave, is what will it take for Galaxy to defeat DC United this time around?
What will it take for the Galaxy to win?
What will it take for Galaxy, yes, to defeat DC United this time around?
I think from the DC side, they can't be predictable. They're too predictable to play. From the Galaxy side, I think it's a team that you have to realize, for as much as I just talked about, that they're a team that's going to maybe be loose and fancy free because, look, the coach is got fired. What do we have to lose? But it's painful what they're going through right now. Think about it's all happening on the road as well. That adds to the drama, the backdrop, if you will. You play a game in Nashville on a Wednesday night. Your coach gets fired at 1 a.m. after the game. That's some heavy drama. these people are people, and there's personalities and relationships. So if you're LA, you're at home, go at DC United, because DC United's got some scars and wounds, and they can be exposed, as certainly Nashville showed it by scoring 5 unanswered goals.
Well, Dave, as you can see, we have a surprise for you. A lot of younger fans are not aware of the history between both squads and how, in the early years, they battled tooth and nail for supremacy in MLS and CONCACAF. Since MLS expanded, they rarely play each other. We mentioned that. So it's always difficult to predict how they'll do against each other. So I think we need a different perspective. Dave, we wanted to surprise you. Joining us now from his secret bunker underneath the Legends Plaza at Dignity Health Sports Park, please give a warm welcome to the voice of the LA Galaxy, Joe Tutino.
How you doing, guys? How you doing, Dave? I heard the voice of the Washington Warthogs of the CISL was on, and so I figured since the voice of the Anaheim Splash had to join you. So,
Wow, that's also going back. In fact, I have a soccer team here, a USL League Two team that I'm 5% owner of, and one of our assistant coaches is Albert Oni, and he went in his playing days by Albert the One and Oni, and he played
Oh, wow.
Washington Warthogs, and he still shouts my goal call at me. But boy, this is a great surprise to see Joe, because Joe knows that I'm Joe's biggest fanboy, right? Joe, I'm always, when I get a chance to hear Joe Tutino, and I either use the phone to sync up, or I definitely click the Apple English language, and I actually clipped an article because I was so proud of Joe, where it was an LA Times article that mentioned
oh boy,
LA being blessed with some great voices, and threw Joe in there with other sports as well, which for all of us here that are joining tonight, we come from a perspective where we're still fighting for soccer's space in this country. We've come a long way, make no mistake, but the fact that Joe Tutino was mentioned with the other major sports, because let's face it, they always still say the big four. They leave us out, even though we average 21,000 a game or whatever we're averaging. So, and I'm just so proud to hear Joe every time, because he's been with us from the start. So we're brothers. We're brothers.
yeah, I'm very fortunate because Dave was already in the game, and I was a teenager trying to make my way into the game, and the voice of the Baltimore Blast back in the day,
Yes,
if I remember
yes.
correctly,
Wow.
as well. And I'm a fan of the San Diego Sockers, and so Dave's coming into San Diego and announcing championship games, and I'm buying tickets to watch the Sockers play, and luckily for me, my team won back then indoors. So we've been carrying the water for this sport for a long time. Me as a fan, you as a broadcaster, and I think we're just very fortunate to be able to continue to do it.
No, and you know what's you mentioned the San Diego Sockers, and you said you won some championships. Think about it. If the San Diego Sockers should get more respect nationally for what they did. What was it? 8 titles? I
10.
can't.
They won 10.
Yeah. All right.
And then they've gone on now. The next rendition of them, I think they have 15 now under their crest, and so
Well,
not the same indoor game as it used to be, but they're still very talented.
the reason we're having this conversation right now is people like Ron Newman did not leave this country in the early 60s and 70s. And Ron Newman coached the Los Angeles Skyhawks. Google that. Look that up. He was a part of LA soccer history as well.
Championship too, I believe.
Yes, because Ron was a winner. Ron's, again, as we talked about coaches tonight, and this is why I believe so much in Greg Vanny or Bruce Arena. It's not an accident. When no matter what league, what sport, Ron won outdoors, Ron won indoors. They figured out. But we are having this conversation because my first broadcast partner, Gordon Bradley, he tells me a story. The NASL was down to 5 teams in 1969. He had offers to go back to England. At that time, you could only buy a soccer ball on the East Coast in New York. There was, and of those 5 teams, there was not a New York. He and Clive Toy started the New York Cosmos, and Clive Toy went on that 3-year mission to get Pele because he realized the only way to succeed in New York, there's only one New York. You got to go out and get the biggest of the biggest, and it took him 3 years. But if you don't have people like that doing that, I argue that this game, it wouldn't mean we wouldn't have soccer in this country, but I think it would still be, like it was from 1900 to 1960s, where you had Polish communities, Italian communities, Mexican, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. We still have all those communities active in our sport, but we wouldn't have a league like we have today.
You know what, though? We failed, though, because those community teams have not yet embraced our league.
Correct.
And we still have work to do.
No, we do.
You're so right. I'm another one of those guys that says, hey, we have to recognize the greats of the NASL, because so many of those guys, and I told this story before, a lot of them had to go play indoors because they left for the United States under political asylum. Julie V, one of the greats of indoors. Steve Jungle would have been an incredible player outdoors. Guys like that, they were banned by FIFA and had to fill their suspensions of 4 years. Zoltan Toth was one of the great goalkeepers of indoors, and then they were able to play outdoor when the NASL was on its deathbed at the end, and they had to finish out the careers indoors. And they were incredible players, and we were so lucky to be able to watch them play. At least I was growing up, and you as a broadcaster being able to call their game.
No, and your point that it makes, and this is why, Edgar, your show, and this is why we got to keep nagging the nags, right? That's what we're. It's why it's so important, because we can have all these. The game has grown to such heights, but it's still all about what we do at the grassroots level. And to Joe's point, that is the part we still have not done a good job of engaging these communities. And this is why, we're with the Annapolis Blues, and I'm not doing this as a cheap promo. We have a USL League Two team that's averaging over 8,000 in Annapolis. But it's doing that because, we're getting out in all the communities and making it a club where everyone can touch. But we're still, quite frankly, working hard. We have a sizable Hispanic community now in Annapolis, and we've got to earn their trust. I frankly will give out tickets just to encourage them that it's going to be a safe space to come enjoy a game. I'll give out tickets that I buy because I'm a part owner, so I don't want it to go against the other owners' bottom line. I remember before our first practice, before our first home game, I was right next to the guy who was cleaning out the portable toilets, and I saw him watching our team practice, and I thought, I got to get him as a fan. So we're still is fancy schmancy, and we got the World Cup, Club World Cup. We got Michael Buffer, Let's Get Ready to Rumble, which I don't know if you heard. I don't like that. We don't need that in our game. I like Michael. I'm sure he's a nice guy, but we still need to get everybody involved.
So, gentlemen, I do have some questions for you, because I want you guys to share with some of the younger fans that aren't familiar with the DC United LA Galaxy rivalry and some of the early years of MLS, to learn from both of you, because you have had amazing careers and you have so much wealth of knowledge. So my first question to both of you, and you kind of touched on this a bit already, what can you tell us about those wild early years of MLS coverage?
Dave, you want to pick this one up?
One thing I will say that I say the first thing goes to my mind, that those early days. I still remember the first ever game in San Jose, and there was all kinds of press conferences, and we sold out the game, and it was DC and the San Jose Clash. This is not involving LA, but then all the questions about, like crowd figures, and Doug Logan wisely just said, we're hoping to get 5 figures, and of course he goes, oh, you're downplaying it, and then the Rose Bowl. I don't know what they got for the first. You were at that first game, though. I know
9,252, if I remember correctly.
How much was it?
69,200 and change.
So we started getting those big crowds, and it showed there was something there. We weren't going to average 69,000, but that was. But there was so much still from the early days. Now we talk about who's going to build a stadium. We talk about pigeons on floats going around New York City. But the early days, you still had a lot of people talking about, is this league going to survive? I was working at also the Fox affiliate, Channel 5 in DC, doing sports. I would have to, push to get every bit of coverage. I still remember DC United played a U.S. Open Cup game at RFK, and we only had like 3,000 or whatever. And my news director at WTOP the next morning comes in, and uh, I didn't lie to him, but I said, "Oh, DC United's averaging about 18,000," which we were, because he was aghast that I was leading with the U.S. Open Cup game. So it really was the Wild West, and we were just hoping to make it.
Yeah, I was. I mean, I was the executive producer of Extra Sports 690. I was already on the air, so I had a career making some money, and we kind of waited. Remember, I started in the CISL as a paid gig doing play-by-play, and we knew that league fell apart, and everybody, my colleagues, were saying the same thing. Well, we'll see how long this league survives, but soccer's not going to make it in this country. And all my talk show hosts were saying the same thing, and I was the only one, shaking my fist in the air and say, "You'll see, you'll see." And then we had the expansion and the 12 teams, and so everybody's feeling really good. And then right after that, not long after that, we had contraction, and those same voices came roaring right back. You see, the league is not going to survive, and thank goodness for three men, the league did survive. And otherwise, I think that everybody else would have been right.
No, and that we should celebrate that. Lamar Hunt,
Mm-hmm.
Kraft, and Philip Anschutz.
Yep.
Because the league, we're not, again, that's another reason we're not having this conversation. This is why we should appreciate every moment. I do, certainly at a game, because, I grew up with Johan Cruyff playing for the Diplomats, and all of a sudden it's taken away. And it's gone for a long, long time.
Yep.
So this is why, we can have our favorite clubs in England and Mexico and, wherever. That's great. But I do think it's important to support your local club, not because they need to work to earn your support. I'm not saying you do it as a charity, but if you feel passionate about the game and about the team, it's not always going to be roses.
Yep. Hard work.
So-
And I think when getting back to your question, I don't think it was all that wild and wacky in terms of television broadcasts and whatnot. It was a matter of we had work to do. And those of us, a small handful of us, Rick Davis was my broadcast partner originally with the LA Galaxy. So I know you know him very well, Dave. And we just knew that we had work to do, and we had a great opportunity here. For me, I was a pig in mud. I was 26 years old, and I started in the business when I was 19. So this was my first big chance, and I was going to take it for as far as I could. And thank goodness I'm still here. And so I don't think it was all that crazy. It was a matter of we had producers that didn't know the game. I think thinking about that and then kind of going back, and then we had a list of things to do that the league wanted us to do no matter what. And all of a sudden, we had stuff that would show up in the game that had zero to do with the story of our game, but we had to do it. But other than that, that's what you do. You just kind of take care of business and move forward. And at the end of the game, I got another game under my belt. I'm happy to be here.
A lot of people, by the way, I know Dave, you mentioned this before, and Joe has also talked about it. The very first LA Galaxy match that was broadcast on TV was done by Dave Johnson.
Right.
Yes,
correct?
yes, that's right. I almost forgot about that. We were in Tampa Bay, and they had a big crowd. It was probably their last big crowd, Tampa Bay Mutiny, and obviously Jorge Campos that first year was a big draw. Lothar Osiander was the coach of the Galaxy, and I can't remember the Mutiny touchline. It was very narrow, and Lothar Osiander got up off the bench to protest a call, and it was against a referee who had kind of a thin skin anyway. It didn't last in MLS, with all due respect, and he ended up getting thrown out of the game because he came on the field. Well, he came on the field because he stood up. I mean, it was that the old, they called it the sombrero,
Right.
Tampa Stadium, and I remember Danny Villanueva telling me. I actually the next morning. This was back in the talk about craziness in another way. I had done an A-League game in Rochester on Friday night, which was the days when the Rochester Rhinos were like, we wanted them in the MLS because they were hitting 12,000 a game. I flew down to do that Galaxy game. Mike Connell, who was an NASL legend with the Rowdies, the game was on KTLA. This was arranged by Danny Villanueva, a great soccer family in Los Angeles, as I view the obvious that you already well know. But and then the Sunday, I was flying out to meet DC United to play the Colorado Rapids. So that Saturday morning, I'm in the lobby, and I think Campos is flying back to Mexico or somewhere. And Villanueva was explaining that he was on the phone all night long, but he made a long distance phone call from his room, which
Oh boy.
that might have broken the budget right there in the first year. Just if you're going to make a phone call, you use a calling card, or this is old school stuff. Everyone has cell phones now, but this is 1996. So yeah, I do remember that.
So, gentlemen, after MLS Cup 96 and the season opener in 97, which I remember I was there, LA Galaxy fans viewed DC United as a rival. Was that the same from the DC United side, Dave?
Yeah, I think so. Yes, I qualified that. Our initial, and they still are, even though the Red Bulls, but they were the Metro Stars. There was that argy bargy that had, gone on between. I mean that in a friendly way, and obviously supporters could travel to New York and to DC and vice versa. So, that was probably stronger even in the playoffs that year. There was some edginess, but it was not easy, needless to say, for DC United to win that first MLS Cup in those crazy conditions, and I think just because we had some of the first stars of the league, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we had an Echeverry and Mauricio Cienfuegos,
Right.
yeah, so Kobe. So there was a LA glitter to it, and that was attractive to DC as a fan situation.
Yeah, I agree. And if not for a 20-minute collapse, things could have been a little different for the Galaxy in the early going. But I would look at those early years as the Galaxy were almost like the Buffalo Bills. And in that they would get there, and then unfortunately they'd run into DC United. The game in '99, I actually did that one at back then it was Sullivan Stadium at Foxborough, and of course Robin Fraser has a dislocated shoulder. Steve Jolly has the unfortunate pass back to Kevin Hartman, but looking back now, whatever how many years it's been, DC was the better team for that particular run at the moment, and they deserved everything about it going there. And then finally in 2002, the Galaxy broke through with the win against the New England Revolution. And so even then, though, it was still DC until the Galaxy got it going. I think probably when Bruce took over the club.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, the two clubs, like you said, went on to face each other in MLS Cup 96 and 99, with DC United winning both times. Um, Joe, there was a lot of frustration from the LA Galaxy side of things. You mentioned how, we felt like the Buffalo Bills of MLS, especially because in 2001, we ended up losing to San Jose.
Right.
But a lot of people may not know that the LA Galaxy and DC United met twice in the semifinals of the 1997 and 2000 editions of the CONCACAF Champions Cup, with Galaxy winning both times on penalty shootouts. Joe, on both occasions, did this offer a measure of satisfaction to get revenge against DC United, having lost MLS Cups to them in the prior year?
Really, no, because I think at that time the CONCACAF Champions Cup, until DC won it and then the Galaxy won it, it was a blip on the radar. It was just a blip on the radar at best, and it was no different than even back in the day when these teams were playing in the U.S. Open Cup. Just was not something that we would hear about on a regular basis, and it was just kind of like, okay, this is happening, but it's not league, and we had a lot of education to do for the fans. Whereas even some of my colleagues would say, well, why is this game important? And why are we doing this game? And why are we stopping league play and then coming back to league play? There was a lot of that going on for, I would say, 10, 15 years in the league. And David, am I mistaken there?
No, you're still correct. And as we're still attracting new fans, that's still going on as people say, well, wait a minute, what game is this? And
right.
Again, it's no criticism of the United States. I mean, when we talk about the FA Cup or what, I keep making English references, whatever league you want to make, those have been going on for 100 years, and so you have traditions where you may not win the league, but you win the the FA Cup or the German League Cup, or go right down the list, or a trophy is a trophy. Whereas in this country, that's not normal. We have multiple trophies in the same season.
Dave, I was going to ask you, DC United bounced back from that loss in 97 to win the Champions Cup in 98. And then they topped that off by beating the Copa Libertadores champion Vasco da Gama to win the last ever Copa Interamericana, a trophy that remains with the club. If
Yes.
I'm recall correctly, right? It's still there.
Yes. Yep.
What was the
We didn't
reaction
have
from?
an RFK. So,
What was that?
no, we have a trophy case at RFK. It was amazing. Well, it was an interesting time moving from RFK to Audi Field, because you want to make sure those treasures don't get lost.
Oh no, it's amazing because that trophy has a lot of history, and then here it is with DC United in MLS.
Yeah.
Um,
We
what
were
was
drunk. We were drunk with success. We beat Vasco da Gama. We won the 97, 98. We lost to the Chicago Fire, but I can still picture, and God rest his soul, Kevin Payne. And again, there's certain people that made a difference in this league, especially that fought for this league's success. Again, you had one, and it had the Villanuevas, the
Right.
people. And they gave before with the Aztecs as they tried to make it happen. We thought we should have won in '98 as well. So it was we were feeling like, I don't know, the New York Yankees, the LA Lakers, whatever you want to call it. There was a swagger about the team.
Well, I'm sure the Galaxy felt like they should have won in '98 and not lose to Chicago in the semis,
Oh,
but
God.
because of that record-setting season that they had. But unfortunately, they didn't get that opportunity to play in the final that year. And hats off to Chicago and Bob Bradley and what they were able to do for that first one there for them.
Well,
No,
imagine a DCLA final, the Rose Bowl in '98.
Yeah,
Well,
that was the
that,
hope, right?
would have been a 90,000 game, if not 100,000, because
Yeah.
everybody would have paid attention in Los Angeles for sure on that particular game.
So, gentlemen, great teams develop an identity from within that defines them. How would both of you describe those early DC United and LA Galaxy clubs?
I would just say and this is why I will forever, be such a fan of Bruce Arena. And I think, you look at, again, U.S. men's national team. We're at the bottom of the barrel in '98. If VAR was around in 2002, we would have beaten Germany in advance. So, it was about the players. He gave them, in his phrase over and over again, the players make the decisions. The players make the decisions. He gave them the freedom to play. And I think that still shows in his teams and the way he coaches. And somebody once said to me about Bruce Arena that it's always, they said, I always like being with him because he's always the smartest guy in the room. And they said it kind of jokingly, but Bruce is to a credit, is a guy who takes a situation and figures it out. And we reference Ron Newman. I believe the same kind of situation. Ron Newman wins an indoor soccer, outdoor, I don't care. You put Ron Newman in charge of an NBA team, I think he'd win a title.
I think to Ron's credit, he was a man manager or a personality manager. He knew what buttons to push. And the difference between him and Bruce was the fact that, Bruce was keep it simple, stupid in terms of how to go about doing it. And then you had Siggy Schmid, who at that time was also one of the great coaches in college soccer, and then making his way now to MLS. And he was, that rivalry between he and Bruce was on the college level, and then coming back up to MLS, and that continued there. And Siggy was more of the I don't want to say micromanager, but he had a vision of how to play and what he wanted out of his players along the way. And so he was much more engaged, and I learned later, than Bruce would be, at least in front of somebody like me. Ask Bruce about a formation or a lineup, and Bruce would roll his eyes at you. I think he still does that today.
Well, that means he likes you.
Yeah, I agree with that. I had a conversation with Bruce when he was the coach and manager of the LA Galaxy. We were in DC for a game, and we were talking about the Hall of Fame, and he did an interview regarding Jaime Moreno, who was not in the National Soccer Hall of Fame at the time, and I happened to be there, and we argued in the fact that we both agreed that he belonged in the Hall of Fame until Bruce Wright said, "Yeah, I agree," and it was like it was a breakthrough moment for me because I
Yeah.
still remember it now, 20 years later almost.
Well, and that was, Jaime Moreno was, again, this league needed
Yeah,
superstars, and he was a young player. We got him young from Middlesbrough, and so important success of the league.
great
Well,
player.
gentlemen, with El Tráfico, the Cali Classico on the Galaxy side, and the Atlantic Cup, and that growing rivalry with Philly Union for DC United, um, where does that DC United LA Galaxy rivalry fit, and does it still matter in 2025?
I mean, real quick for DC United, and I don't mean in disrespect. We, even though close in proximity, we have not developed that rivalry with the Philadelphia Union, and I think there needs to be some kind of organic moment that happens,
Mm-hmm.
a game, certainly, and this is why I think the DC United LA still resonates because we were there for the first MLS Cup. You could have won in '96, you could have won in '99. So we've got a championship history, reaching the final history. So DC United, and it's now the Red Bulls, but it was the Metro Stars, and they're still that. And then it's the LA Galaxy. That's the 1-2 in DC's category.
I would agree with that, and I think the same thing goes for the Galaxy. Was Galaxy San Jose, and then obviously LAFC has joined that group. And from a cross-country situation, Galaxy DC. The unfortunate thing about the rivalry is the fact that we don't have the home and home across the league like we used to have. So this rivalry would continue to heat up, as opposed to now we're kind of re-educating a new fan base along the way and say, hey, no, this is an important game. It's an important game. These guys go all the way back, and they meant a hell of a lot to the league back then for both those teams to be great. And somebody had to win, and in the early days it was DC United that won. But it was very important that the Galaxy were pushing DC, and DC was winning the championships back then for this league because nobody knew anything about everybody else.
Yeah, and I, speaking personally, uh, I've always favored these DC United LA Galaxy matches because, like we said, especially in the early years, both teams seem to push themselves to higher standards, and they push themselves to do things that other teams wouldn't do. I remember watching that first MLS Cup final, and I'm so happy. I'm elated. I'm like, Galaxy's gonna win this match. I was listening to the broadcast, and I remember in Spanish with Veloz Gonzalez, Duke Tino, who we recently lost. And
Yes,
Veloz
Right.
Gonzalez, and he was saying like, oh, I just got word that the LA Galaxy is preparing a parade
Mm.
route to go through Old Town Pasadena and culminate at City Hall. So remember, fans, get ready, to celebrate and be there. And then DC United was like, this is not gonna end like this. And I remember when that final goal came in, and I looked at Jorge Campos lying there in the rain, staring up at absolute darkness, I guess, and the rain pouring down. I remember I felt so completely gutted that I developed like this hate for DC United right there and then. But like I said, earlier, it went from being like I hate these guys. They just took something away from me that I was really hoping for, to just this respect for them. And especially because I was there in '98 covering MLS Cup '98. I got to see what happened before, during, and after the match, listening to Bruce and the players and everybody. And you knew that even though they lost to Chicago, there was a sense that they were going to come back. It wasn't like that, they weren't going to get knocked down. They were going to come back. And the question was, what's LA Galaxy going to do about it? And obviously, in '99, got back to the final and darn again, right? So,
New England Hex once again, back in New England. It must
oh
be.
my God.
Right.
The other part I think that is so special about DC and LA is and get your thoughts on this, Joe. From the start, the two most authentic fan bases, you want to call it, or supporters, but I remember the early days. I mean, RFK just it really
Rumble.
Rumble, and our name was more than a name. It really did unite the community. We still say this to this day. And I know I can, I'm wearing a shirt that says it's in the net, not because I'm in love with myself. I've long lost all my love for myself, but I'm wearing it because we raised money for a supporter who sadly passed away with cancer. The point is, it became a true family. It was the Screaming Eagles. It was a bar Bravo. We always said it was where the K Street lawyer, K Street's our big, to-do list, to-do place in DC, can be right next to the construction worker. And it truly unites. And I always got that feeling when I went out to LA. I still remember, now you're going to the second year in 97, and you're hoping that there's not a novelty fact. And there was, I want to say, Joe, there was close to 60,000 for the first game of 97. Somebody can look it up. DC I was playing LA, ended in a 0-0 draw. It was not a great game, but a big crowd, but just authentic fan base. And it's just two of the most authentic, I think.
There was an innocence of the league back then where the fans who were the real true supporters, and we had the Galaxians who started out, and there was also another supporters group called the Ultras at that particular time. You could wrap your arms around the team and take ownership of it, and the players were also understanding what the responsibility was to sell the game. And I think it probably was the same thing for DC United. Sell the game, and these people, these fans, would do incredible things for the players individually. They would know them personally and be really a big part of their lives along the way. And I think the players understood that back then. But it was a small group, and it took a little while. And luckily, I just think we're very lucky that we were the people that ran our league, the owners that put the money into the league, were patient enough to stay with it.
Yeah.
And we're just very fortunate in that regard, because there were plenty of alphabet leagues that came and went. What was it? The WSL on the West Side, I think, was around for a while, regional league, and Dave brought up the A League that I think ended up going coast to coast, and that was around in the early days where Galaxy players would be sent down to an A League team. I think Brian Ching was one of them along the way. I think Alan Gordon was an A League player at some time as well. And so, that structure was kind of loosely living until it finally all kind of slowly came together, in the kitchen, so to speak.
No, that's why
go ahead, Dave. I'm sorry.
No. That's why this is so important. That's why we have to stay with this, because it was not. We're not. We're gonna have good times, bad times, but we've got something that's going to keep moving forward. That wasn't always the case. What Joe mentioned was after the NASL folded, they tried the Western Soccer League on the west, the AASL on the east. I was part of the Maryland Bays that won the 1990 championship. But the first playoff game, our first broadcast I ever did, I went to the owner of the Bays in 1988, and I said, "Look, if I can get you on a station, will you, fly me down to Fort Lauderdale?" We were playing the Fort Lauderdale Strikers, who at that time were, the best of the league, and we were playing them in the playoffs. So I go to this religious station and buy $250 with my money. I paid for it because the airtime for 2 hours. And they said to me, "Now, do you need more?" I said, "No, soccer game, it's beautiful. It's 2 hours." "Okay, but you can't have any beer sponsorships because it's a religious station. So, or liquor or anything like that." So we go to Fort Lauderdale. We're driving to the game. Pitch black skies. I am ended up in a rain delay, and I'm by myself, and I'm just grabbing people as they come in the press box and interviewing them, hoping they have something remotely to do with the game. And so we've come from there to where we are now, where we have people interacting with us. Edgar, what you're doing here is so important it's hard work to midweek shows, and we got to keep people connected, and we got to keep building this thing.
I agree, 100%.
So I did look up that match. I was in attendance, by the way, at that match. I remember I was still in college and I was writing for the University Times of Cal State LA, and I had a press pass. But I remember the RA in our dorms, she said that she went to school with Dave Baudril. Is that his name? Yeah, Dave
Yeah,
Baudril.
yeah.
And she's like, yeah, yeah, I know him. She's like, we were all classmates. We went to school together. And I said, well, he plays for DC United. She's like, oh, really? And I was like, yeah, they're in town. So I got her a ticket to the match. I took a couple of my roommates, and just so happened that the tickets were in the Galaxian section. So throughout the entire match, she was wearing DC United gear, and she was yelling for DC United, and everybody around her kept yelling at her. And obviously, DC won the match. In the old penalty kick shootouts, it was
Mhm.
3-2. The old run-up
The
shootouts, but
5 second shootout. The
yeah.
NASL shootout is what I call it.
Yeah.
And so afterwards, after I've done my interviews and everything, I go and meet her in the parking lot, and I'm like, "So how was it? It was. You guys won, so you must be." She's like, "I hated it. Everybody was yelling at me the entire time. People were throwing stuff at me." I was like, "Oh my god, I am so sorry, but you got an authentic experience there." And that was just in '97. So I love the fact that this league is still around. It's still thriving. You guys mentioned the stuff that I do here with News Across the Galaxy. I'm in a group chat with a amazing group of other MLS podcasters and creatives and journalists, and they work so hard to put together a lot of content. For a lot of them, like myself, we don't get paid for it. We just do it because we love the sport, and we want to see it thrive. I used to get paid to cover MLS, back in the day, but these days, I work as a proposal writer, and I do this to scratch an itch, and also because I love the sport. And um, I have had these experiences in the past where I'm able to bring some of that I've had in the past, and have people like you guys come on board and share your experiences. And I think it's important to curate the history of Major League Soccer and sport in this country, because we've seen the NFL do it, and we've seen Major League Baseball do it, and it's important for us to do this for Major League Soccer and for soccer in America as well. Um, so sorry, I didn't mean to monologue, but
No, no, no. I was going to let Dave answer. Go ahead, Dave.
Well,
Pick up.
I was going to say amen. I mean, because sometimes the people don't want to hear about history, but what makes the NFL great, from the NFL films and blah blah, history, baseball. Yeah, it's got a modern game going on, and they got a pitch clock and this and that. But the Yankees still need to celebrate, Lou Gehrig and down the line. So you don't have a successful present unless you truly embrace your history.
I
yeah,
agree, and I think MLS didn't begin in 2002,
No.
and soccer didn't begin in this country in 1996. And I think we need to understand that. And there are some incredibly great players. It's not just Pelé, Canalia, and Beckenbauer that played in this country during that time. There were great players all over the country. Dave just brought up Johan Cruyff, who ended up playing at the LA Aztecs as well. Where else did he end up? He was going around the league, all over the place.
I think just those two. He had because LA had Rhinus. Again, we didn't have this thing we're talking on now, the internet. So I didn't realize just how good these guys were that I was watching as I was a kid.
yeah, George Best in LA.
Yes, George
Aztecs as
Best
well.
was in LA, and Rhinus Michaels was coach of the Aztecs. He brings Cruyff over in '79. He ends up playing in '80, but Thomas Rondgren, who became my broadcast partner, ended up coming first to the Aztecs, and then to the Diplomats, who were at the time bought by Madison Square Garden, who then paid a lot of money to get Cruyff to Washington, because he tried. Everybody was trying to compete with the Cosmos at that time, and again, the Cosmos did a lot for the game in this country. I still think to this day, if we had an internet in 1975, if we had social media, there's a lot of bad things about social media, but if I think social media should just be for sports and recipes and nothing else. But I think, and if we had a cable television market back then, I think the NASL would have succeeded. The problem was in '79 or the '70s, you had the two papers that didn't want to cover it, the three TV stations that didn't want to cover it. So it was hard to build a community.
It was always presented as a foreign sport, also.
Right,
So
correct.
I
Yeah.
remember, watching the highlights. I would watch the highlights, and even the presentation of the news broadcaster or the sportscaster back then was presenting it as a foreign sport, and we have a team here in San Diego where I grew up, and so that it was very difficult. But think about this: 19 whatever it was, 1980s, early 80s, and they ended up winning the soccer bowl. The Tulsa Roughnecks. We had a team in Tulsa, one of the hottest places in this country, playing on a carpet. Back then, there was no such thing as real artificial surface. It was a green carpet on top of cement, and that's what they were doing. And these guys, I mean, they really left a lot of themselves on the field to really build the game in this country. And so I agree with Dave. I mean, we can't forget the history of our game, and we shouldn't leave behind the greatest players that played in our game, not just in my time of the 70s and 80s, but even before that.
No,
And this
because
is,
they made it. Yeah.
I was gonna say, this is why a lot of people, I've gotten criticism from other younger MLS podcasters about this, but I tell them I think it's so important to push for the U.S. Open Cup, because that's how I learned about Bethlehem Steel, Maccabi Los Angeles, some of those great teams. When you go down that deep rabbit hole into the U.S. Open Cup, and you start looking at all the different chambers, you discover these amazing players from an era that people don't even realize that there was a thriving soccer league back in the 30s and the 40s, and a lot of it, one of the biggest reasons why it didn't succeed was because of the recession, and then in World War II, and a lot of the players had to go off to war, and some of them died, and then it was just very difficult. And then they had the soccer wars, where the two leagues were fighting to see which one would be greater, and they pretty much devastated each other. But the sport has been around for more than 100 years here. It's one of the oldest sports that's been played in the United States. And like you said, it's unfortunate that it's always been presented as like a foreign sport when it's as American as American football. But
Yeah.
that's
That's our
like
job.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's our job,
No,
right?
and to the younger folks, you're not going to remember the time, but I'm sure Joe and you probably remember growing up. In the '70s, everything was communism. We got to wipe out communism. We can't have communism
Oh
in this.
yeah.
So soccer coming to this country, to some people they say, oh, the next thing will be communism. I mean, it just it's
Yeah.
it was kind of ridiculous now to say that, but there were actually people thinking, oh, they're making us teach the metric system and now communism and soccer. It's oh god.
Yeah, I mean, it was foreign, and people would ruffle their noses at it, and that's kind of how it went. And and Dave remembers this. I mean, there was a time that there was a rule in the NASL that you had to have two Americans on the field at all times.
Ah,
That's where we were, and they were all foreign players, and some of them didn't speak English at the time, but many of them worked to do so. But the great thing about those players back then, though, and Dave, you remember this, they would say something. They didn't have media training. They would call out their teammates and they would say, so and so is the reason why we lost the game, and that bonehead play over there, and that thing over there, and that's what they would do. And some of the writers that I grew up around and got to know along the way, they would talk about it. They would say, "Man, the greatest quotes came from soccer players because they weren't put in the box. They spoke their culture and they spoke their truth along the way, and that's kind of how it went. And that all changed as time progressed, and we have now that every player has some type of media training going forward.
yeah. I was going to say that. I remember seeing some of that in MLS. One of the things that I cherish was that you could go down to the press conference after the match, or you could just wander over to the dressing room and catch the players as they're coming out to get dressed afterwards. And I mean, you give them their space to get dressed, right? But once they're ready, you approach them, and you could talk to any player in the dressing room. And some of the best conversations I had in MLS were from these players who maybe had a bad game, or they just had a chip on their shoulder, and they would share something with you. And I was like, dear God, this is my lead, right? I remember Danny Pena, Joe. Remember him?
Mm-hmm.
He seemed like the gruffiest,
Dave remembers them
meanest
also.
guy, And then you approach him, and he's like this really nice guy. And at the time, I asked him for some advice, like, "Hey, I'm playing. I'm being made to play center back. I was wondering if you could give me some advice." He's like, "Oh yeah, you go up to the guy, you grab his shirt, and then you whack him in the kidneys really hard when the ref isn't looking." And I was like, "Oh my god!" So thank you. There was another time when I spoke to Haru Karapetian. Remember him?
Yeah, yeah.
And Galaxy had just it was a match against Aston Villa. It was a friendly against Aston Villa in '97. And I remember, was it 98? I think it was 97. But I remember after the match, he was furious with Octavio Zambrano because he said, "It has always been my dream to play against a Premier League team. And and he hates me, and he did not put me into the match. And now I hate him too." And I was like, oh my God, what did I step into here? But at the same time, some of the other quotes I would get from players were very heartfelt and genuine. And so this was, like I said, in the early years of MLS. So I took some time off to finish school, and then I ended up working, finding a different career. Like I said, I'm a proposal writer now. But back in 2013, I was given an opportunity to go back to the press box and start covering MLS again. And I just did it for that 1 year, I remember. But I remember going down to the dressing room, I mean, going to the press conference and all that, and everything had been streamlined so much that it was like they heard you into the press conference, and certain people, you have a certain number of questions you can ask, and then you heard it into the dressing room, and they told you can only ask 3 questions, and everybody gets the same 3 questions and the same 3 answers from the same players. And I was thinking, well, we're all going to have the same questions and answers. And I remember I really wanted to ask Omar Gonzalez a question one time, and I was about to approach him, and I was told, no, 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 you can't talk to him because we're over here. And I was like, okay, I'm sorry, I haven't done this in a while. But Omar saw me, and as everybody was leaving, Omar like whispered, like, hey, hey, come over here. And I was like, yeah. He's like, what do you want to ask me? I'm like, oh, sweet. So I got my question and I got my answer, and I was like, it still works, I guess. But yeah, we don't have that in MLS anymore. So I felt like some of the younger journalists got to miss out on that, and it's maybe one day we'll get some of that. But everything is so streamlined and corporate these days. It's kind of hard to get back to that.
We're too sophisticated for our own good, but I'm great to hear their names like
Yeah.
Karpetian. Danny Califf was one of your early players, if I remember.
Mhm.
And again, you talk about sacrifice. I remember calling him in the A League when I think he was playing with the New York Centaurs on a field that had broken glass and God knows what. That franchise was not too swift. Lothar Osiander had a tremendous career, but he made most of his money as a waiter in San Francisco, as you know the story. He was a waiter at a very good restaurant in San Francisco. So these, as much as and I guess every generation, laughs at the next generation or whatever, but. Bruce Murray is my broadcast partner. That ASL of the late '80s would play 2 games in a weekend, because they had to, and they often would be Friday in Jersey City and Saturday in Albany, New York. That's a glamorous road trip. So, we've come a long way. We're putting players in leagues we never thought they'd be in positions they never thought they'd be in, but that's still, I think, the great conundrum of are they playing with enough heart, like the team in 1990 that qualified for the World Cup before there was an automatic qualification. This probably also gets back. We're a country of I don't know anymore, 350 million. God knows what it is. We probably still aren't reaching out to all the communities we need to reach out to. And that gets back to, and that's why I do believe why we have a club here in Annapolis, Maryland, but the USL League Two, and whatever you want to call it, local soccer, as I hope people watching, and I know there's a lot of clubs in the LA area, and whether it's NPSL or the USL League Two, to support those clubs too, because that's important, because you're going to find somebody with these teams.
Well, I can add a little bit to that. Galaxy played against Tijuana. They played an exhibition in San Diego, and Joe Corona kind of ran roughshod over the Galaxy. And Bruce Arena after the game goes, "How did we not see this guy?
Yeah.
How did we miss out on him?" And now we'll fast forward to today, and everybody's been talking about Diego Luna at the Gold Cup, and I would agree. I think there's hundreds of those players out there that didn't fit the mold somewhere along the way that have been left out. And those are the players we need, because we have the pretty boys and we have all that, and we've seen the critique of our U.S. men's national team, but we don't have the Diego Lunas, enough of those guys that push those people, those guys that might be better, that might be more talented, that might be playing abroad and whatever they're doing, to really become who they can be.
Right.
And I think we don't have that yet in our country that they have. I don't know. Pick your Spain for the sake of argument, or France, or Italy, even though Italy's on the downslope right now. Things like that. We don't have that yet. We're building, though. I think we're headed in the right direction.
And I absolutely agree with you. And look, as I say this, it's so easy to critique. I would not be one of, it's a positive. It's a big country. It's also a negative in some ways. A big country. I don't know if negative is the right word, but there's more you have to sort through. In other words, if you're trying to field a team of 10, if you only have 15 players to choose from, you can figure that out. But when you have a country of 350 million, how are you going to make sure that you find that Diego Luna? And look, we were talking about. Jamie Vardy was a non-league player in England, and he goes on to be a Premier League championship. So, every country, I guess, has this. But that's why local soccer is important, that we don't lose players that want to continue to progress and grow their game, because that's where we'll hopefully find the next superstar.
Well, gentlemen, I have to rope it back to the LA Galaxy DC United match, because that's where we're going to be heading towards this weekend. But like I said earlier, both clubs are going through a really rough time. Joe, we are well aware of actually, we're not aware of what's going on with the LA Galaxy. We're trying to see the team try to fix things. It's been a very weird, unpredictable season. I know, Dave, you mentioned about some of the stuff that's been going on in DC. Joe, from your point of view, and I'm glad we have you here. I want to ask you this: what will it take for LA Galaxy to return to their winning ways? And Dave, while Joe is answering, I want you to think about this as well. What will it take for DC United to fix things and return to prominence in a very crowded Eastern Conference and MLS? So, Joe,
Well, I don't want us to take for granted that the LA Galaxy is the defending champions of Major League Soccer. 2025 has been a rough season. But I will say that I think the Galaxy is closer to getting back on track than we're going to give them credit for, because what I saw last game against Vancouver was encouraging to me, a team that played a lot like the team we saw in 2024. And the next big step is this weekend against DC United to continue to prove to themselves that they are that club. 2025 has been, as you mentioned, a season full of weird surprises and odd ways to lose games and mistakes that players would never normally have and have played. And we've had more than a handful of those guys not play at the same level as they played last year. And that's something for them to figure out on their own. But I will say, to what I saw last game against Vancouver was encouraging. And that the next thing they have to do is build upon that. Yeah, it's a rough year. But there's a glimmer of hope somewhere. Like I've told you guys before, I never prepare for a loss. I prepare for a victory in the broadcast. And I think Dave might do the same thing for his broadcast as well.
Yeah, I'm always hoping. I'm an optimistic guy anyway. But on the LA side of things, I'll get back. Greg Vanning, I believe in him, and I believe that you don't expect coming off where you were in December to be where you are in July. I understand that, but the hardest thing is patience is yesterday in this world. But I don't think in the situation with who they have in place, from my view, with Greg Vanny and company, I believe they will get it right. You get a Ricky Puig back. It's not going to solve everything overnight, but the game is, as much as we can look at paper, and it's played on the field. And so, to DC United's point, people say, well, they don't have enough. Well, I don't know. I mean, we don't have Liverpool, but Aaron Herrera and David Schnegg, I would argue they're two of the best outside backs in the league right now. Matty Pelta, who's Finnish national team players, is, and I understand Finland's not Italy or whatever, but these are international players. We have players that I think can do more than is happened on the field so far, and that's not an indictment against Troy Lesesne, who clearly had success with the Red Bulls, who clearly earned the job with DC United. For whatever reason, DC United in this segment of time has become too predictable to play against, and their goal difference is just ridiculously bad, which is a tiebreaker in this league. So those are two strikes against it. So I don't think ever in any sport you fire a coach or make a change unless you have some plan that it'll make it better. Otherwise, it's just a sugar high that because fans comes from, we're all fanatical, we're supporters, we get passionate, and after a loss, you want to fire everybody. And DC, they probably want to fire me as a broadcaster, but I still have a contract for next year, so that can't happen. But I think the for DC United now, I think LA is closer than DC is to getting it right, even though if you looked at the standings, it doesn't reflect that. And that's not to say I don't think DC will eventually get it right, but it cannot be the way it's been for the last couple of months. And we don't know who the eventual coach is going to be, although the reports are he's Rene Wheeler, who was in Switzerland. I'm told, and looking at his resume, he's had success at every level. Clearly, if that's the case, this move was something that's been a couple of months in the work. You don't just call up some guy last night and say, "Hi, you're in Switzerland. What are you doing? We got this job over here." So this change in DC United has been coming for a couple of months. Okay, it's here. Now what? And I think, Joe, this before you came on the broadcast, maybe that's why I think DC United, at least for this week, will be, and I think Greg Vanny might agree, a dangerous team to play against, because who are you playing against? You're not playing against the Troy Lesesne coach team. And I believe you're going to have a lot of freewheeling and maybe street ball.
That could the new coach bump in this particular case. You have the great unknown, the Galaxy, taking on a team that they haven't seen in a number of years, and now they made a big change, and so you have a real unknown of what you're going to get, and you have a bunch of guys that are going to come out, the 16 players that'll get the opportunity to play in this game that have something to prove individually along the way, and they want to punch the Galaxy in the mouth. And I've said this all the time: when the Galaxy play anybody, it's usually marked on the calendar. And I think in this particular time, it was already marked on the calendar. But now I think a lot of these players that play for DC United understand the history of their own club. They understand the history of the rivalry between these two teams. And I'm sure DC is going to be ready to play this game.
So, gentlemen, care to share your predictions for Saturday's match? Usually I do a prediction, but we have Joe here today representing LA Galaxy. So, Dave, you were the guest team, so you get first crack at it. What is your prediction for this match score?
Well, I want to be asked back on this show more every 2 years because it's too much fun. So, I think predictions are always hard. I'm just going to say 2-2.
Okay.
I think it's. I'll say 2-2, and I just that's what comes to my mind. And my reasoning behind that, I think we are going to go for it. When I say we, DC United, I think that'll create some chances, but I think it'll create some openings for LA.
Yeah, I can see that, and I'll stick with Dave's 2-2, but I want to see individuals that are. Marco Royce continues to play well. I want to see him continue to play well. I want to see Gabriel Peck step into what Joseph Painsil was able to do last week. So Gabby, it's time for him to get on track and continue going there. And I liked what I saw defensively. I thought they were free and played well, and there was communication there. And I thought Emilio Garces had his best game, and even Novak Mitrovic, who saved the Galaxy's bacon in the early minutes of that game, allowed for the team to grow and play well. Those are the things I'm looking for this particular weekend. And as I said earlier, I always prepare for a win. The losses take care of themselves. That if something goes sideways, it goes sideways. And that's kind of where I'm at. If it comes 2-2, honestly, that's a setback for the Galaxy because I think they have a mindset of getting themselves back into this race in some way, somehow. And I'm sure that the message internally is, hey, we have to take care of business. We're at home, and this is our fortress, and we have to make it that.
And Joe's right. I mean, but we just both predicted draws, but neither team is in that position where they can accept draws.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like I said at the very beginning, both teams are really hungry to make something happen, get going in the right direction, and um, right now a draw. I mean, I don't know if Galaxy fans are frustrated. I know DC United fans are frustrated, especially after that tough loss against Nashville. So it'll be interesting to see how both teams come out. Like I mentioned earlier as well, I'm really curious to see how a youngster like Mateus Nascimento continues his development. Because I feel we're watching him kind of evolve before our eyes. He came in as a kind of an unknown. I have a friend who lives in Brazil who last year told me amazing things about Gabriel Peck,
Mm-hmm.
and I had him on earlier this season. And I asked him, what can you tell us about Mateus Nascimento?" He's like, he's not quite Gabriel Peck. He's like, he's very raw, but he has talent. It's there. It's just very raw, and he needs a little bit of polish. But the thing is, the Galaxy doesn't have the luxury of time like they did with Peck because he's obviously on loan until the end of the season. But what we're seeing so far, I really like it, Joe. Any insight into Nascimento that you think DC United should look out for?
I'm right there with you. I like how he's developing. I like his chemistry between he and Royce. They seem to understand each other. And when Royce wants a ball coming back at him, and Nascimento is smart enough to understand if Marco Royce wants the ball, I'm going to get it to him. He seems to make pretty good runs at the moment, and obviously he's head on the swivel on the goal that he scored last game on that heavy shot from Eddie Cerrillo that the goalkeeper spilled in front, and he was right there to send it home. So he's got some natural ability there. And I think as he gets more confident, then maybe we'll see that blossom. But you're right, time is running out. It's time to get going. But it's time to get going for the other 10 guys out there as well. So it's not just the one guy. And I think as everybody else around him elevates their game, it'll allow for him to really step in and blossom.
Well, gentlemen, we have a super chat, and that comes with special music.
Well, wait a minute.
Well,
So we have a $5 super chat I want to address because I think here's a question from Adam. Adam, thank you so much for a $5 super chat. He asks, I know this is out of topic, but how's Aaron Herrera? He plays for the Guatemalan national team.
Well, it's not out of topic because let me tell you something. I believe he's one of the best right backs in Major League Soccer. Period. And I am, listen. I'm sure Adam is aware, and we were all well aware. The Guatemalan national team should be very proud of what they accomplished at the Gold Cup. But Aaron Herrera for DC United. He has used DC United as a launching pad to get his career back to the level that it's at, and that includes the success he is having with the national team. And believe me, everybody at DC United was so proud of what he was doing with Guatemala. And again, I stand by. With DC United, I don't want to get into payrolls or this or that. Do we have the right players? That's when you're 4-10-7 or whatever record is, that you apparently you don't have the right players, you don't have the right anything. But I believe left back David Schnegg, who's from Austria, right back Aaron Herrera. They are going to give people fits on the flanks, and that's a strength for DC United, and Aaron Herrera has very much been a part of that.
Well, gentlemen, I hate to bring this conversation to an end because I love hearing to both of you.
You've
It's
only
like
kept Dave for an hour 45 minutes.
Well, with the whole Apple deal, we don't get to hear you guys as much unless but I know the MLS diehards will find you.
Well,
But
everyone find Joe Tutino. All you have to do is click the English radio if you have Apple. If you don't, it's as simple as your phone. And again, people in LA, and I'm not just saying it because Joe is here. He knows it. A real treasure you have in Joe Tutino calling your LA Galaxy games, and he knows that I'm not just doing this now because he's on here, but the minute I have a chance to get home from a DC United game, I'm right there clicking Joe on, and then to me that feels home. Even though LA's never been my home, but it feels like home to me. So this is why this is great, and what you do, Edgar, so appreciative.
Well, gentlemen, where can fans listen to you on game day? I know you've mentioned it. There's the option to put the English radio right on an Apple TV.
We were
But
supposed
for
to have
somebody,
home and away options, but that hasn't developed yet. So hopefully that happens soon.
I know, Dave, you mentioned you're on iHeartRadio, right?
Yeah, you just go to the radio app, but I mean the easy way for this weekend's game, because it'll be if you have Apple, you click select English and you get Joe's broadcast. And believe me, as you know, because I'm talking to a Galaxy audience, you won't be disappointed. But DC United fans will not be disappointed. Or if they want to hear me and Bruce Murray, you go to the iHeart app, and this is the beauty of radio in 2024. Radio is the medium that never goes out of style, because this is the transistor radio of the 70s. It's the phone, and we're just appreciative if you connect with either one of us.
Absolutely. And I'm sure DC United fans are going to be listening to Dave. That's what they do. And they're going to be staying up late on Saturday night to listen to Dave and Bruce do the broadcast, because that's what the core fans do. And they stay with their local broadcasters. And you name the sport. Name the sport. Go to the NBA, and you'll know that the local broadcasters are king. Go to the NFL, and even the local broadcasters are king. Major League Baseball, NHL. That's the connection. And of course, as much as you guys love me with the Galaxy, Dave has that and more with DC United and the years that he spent there from day one.
Gentlemen, where can people find you on social media? Because I know Joe, Dave, I've seen you guys post here and there. Where can people find you? Dave, go first.
At Dave J Sports. At Dave J Sports.
Yeah, at Joe Tutino. On X and Instagram and whatever.
And in case anybody's wondering, especially DC United fans, my name is Edgar Zuniga. Like I said, I've been covering MLS since 1997. I mostly do LA Galaxy, but I also do a lot of MLS stuff. I have a lot of guests. Whenever LA Galaxy is going to have a match, I have guests from other podcasts come on, and we learn about their footballing culture, about the history of their club, what's going on with the teams. And it's a great opportunity to meet wonderful people. Dave and Joe I'm really glad to have you guys on. From me and Bryant and the rest of the News Across the Galaxy crew, we thank you once again for joining us tonight, everyone. Thank you for coming on with us. Dave and Joe, you are both national treasures. Everybody tosses around superlatives these days, but I'm old school, and I save those for when they truly matter. Let me just say that we are deeply honored to have been joined by two MLS legends tonight. Hopefully one day we can catch another edition of DC United versus LA Galaxy in an MLS Cup. For now, as we always say at News Across the Galaxy, keep on nagging. And from me to all the people that know Wu-Tang for life, let's go, everyone. Have a good night.
You're tuned into News Across the Galaxy, where they talk all things LA Galaxy with the Nag Boys. Let's start nagging.